Good afternoon, everyone. Allison Skyberg here with Consolidated Planning Group. We are happy to be here with you today. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome. We're glad you're here. If you have attended our webinars in the past, we're certainly glad that you are back with us today. I always like to go over a few housekeeping items right off the bat. We are in webinar mode today, which means that we can't see you or hear you, but we do know you're there and we're glad that you're here today. And we do invite you to put your questions in the chat box as we're going through the presentation today. Today, we are here with April Martin. She's a Workforce Solutions student hireability navigator. That is a mouthful, April. And so she's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the programs that are available through the state. And I do know that we do have people that attend from out of state. Consolidated Planning Group serves all across the United States. We are domiciled in Texas. The programs that April is talking about today are specifically to Texas, but they are offered all throughout the United States. So you can learn about these programs as well and be connecting with your contact in your state as well. For anybody that is listening to this via podcast, you can email us at contact@cpgcares.net. We'll be happy to give you a copy of today's slides. Everyone who is registered for today's meeting is going to get a copy of the slides and a link to the recording following the presentation today. So having said that, I'm going to turn it over to April to tell us a few things about the programs that you're working on, and then we're going to launch into the transition tips and launching your special needs teen into adulthood. So thank you, April, for being here with us again.
Thank you for having me. So I do several webinars and they are all housed on our Workforce Solutions website. And I often have the privilege of doing them with Allison. Can we go ahead and move to the next slide, Allison? And we'll go ahead and skip that one. So the next webinar I have coming up is going to be with the Bonham Library, and we're going to be talking about 7 cognitive abilities that will be considered when writing an IEP. And the person that I have on is a former teacher and also assistant principal and has lots of great information. And that's coming up November 6th. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. Vocational rehabilitation is throughout the state of Texas. And if you don't know what that is, vocational rehabilitation helps people to prepare for or maintain or even upskill or advance in their employment. We have 2 programs to do that. We have a student program and an adult program. And for the student program, it's age 14 to 22. And for the adult program, it's anything 18 or older. You can use this map to find locations in your area. You can use the scan code to find your vocational rehabilitation office. Oftentimes, your vocational rehabilitation office is co-located within the Workforce Solutions office, but I do give scan codes for both, just in case they're separate in your area. They both offer lots of valuable resources to help people find and maintain their employment status. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide.
April, I want to pause and I want you to tell us, because sometimes it's confusing. I know you and I have talked about this before. What does Workforce Solutions do and what does the Workforce Commission? Like there's VR, there's these different programs, and sometimes they seem like they're the same entity, but they kind of are and they kind of aren't. So tell us about that so we're not confused.
Sure. So sometimes I kind of compare it to a hospital. When you go to a hospital, there may be different doctors there that do different things, and Workforce Solutions and vocational rehabilitation are much like that. Just like if you have a great doctor and they know that something's out of their area, they're going to refer you to some other doctor. And vocational rehabilitation and Workforce Solutions works that way. So for instance, vocational rehabilitation helps anybody who has barriers or disability to employment and training. And so if you come into a Workforce Solutions office and you're talking with one of the client specialists and you're using one of the other programs or writing a resume, getting help with that are some of the things that you can do at a Workforce Solutions. They might say, oh, has your disability sometimes hindered you or made things a little bit harder in your work search or in your current position? And so Workforce Solutions office staff may refer you to vocational rehabilitation. And you don't have to have a reference from the Workforce Solutions office. You can apply yourself, and all of the ways that you can apply are listed on the screen. You can always contact your local VR office. You can call the statewide call center. You can apply online with Start My VR, and you can also even email the VR office. Oftentimes, the quickest way to get services is to find your local VR office and go in and make an appointment, or you can meet with the counselor of the day. And what they do is they will look at where you struggle, and they're going to provide some services, usually for free, to help you reach your employment goals. And when they provide those, they will tell you who will provide them as well.
So a couple of things that I want to mention here, because I feel like this is kind of a best kept secret. First of all, when your students are still in school, if they're still in high school, most high schools have a VR counselor assigned to the school. So you can contact the school's guidance department, and they should be able to tell you who the VR counselor is and put you in touch with them that way. And then I feel like a lot of families hear that my kid's college is being paid for by VR, or we had a lot of testing. We had a vocational evaluation, we had a neuropsych examination, and that was all covered by one of these services. And so part of this is if a person gets signed up for VR, there is a level of assessment that comes into play to determine what the student's gaps or impediments to employment are, right?
Yes, so they'll look at what a student would like to do, and then they'll look at the possibility of being able to do that, what some of the barriers are, and then they'll start outlining those services, and then they'll also look at where you can possibly do training at.
And so a lot of those trainings are covered. And so there is state and federally funded. These programs are state and federally funded. And as I say, they have deep pockets, and they need to get rid of this money or they lose it. Like if you don't use it, you get less next year. So they're working with families and helping kids get placed. So when I think of Workforce Solutions, I think of pre-employment training services, which is shockingly starting as early as age 14, which I love. So they're not even old enough to work yet, but we can start kind of closing those gaps on the impediments to employment with the pre-employment training services, right? And then there's also, I think this is through Workforce Solutions, so correct me if I'm wrong, but like the Summer Earn and Learn program, that's through that. Tell us about that program too, because it won't be long. I think the deadline is usually in February, right, to get signed up for that. So tell us about that.
Okay, so we have two programs. There's SEAL, Summer Earn and Learn, and that is administered through Workforce Solutions in cooperation with Vocational Rehabilitation, so it's a partnership. And then there's a year-round Student Works program, which can be part of the pre-employment training services. And in addition to that, you can also learn about self-advocacy as part of those pre-employment training services. And if people do want to apply for SEAL, you're right, you need to get on that early in the year. And that means you need to apply for vocational rehabilitation services, and then you'll apply for the SEAL program. So the information on the screen would be very pertinent if you want to get involved with that SEAL to go ahead and get started with your application for your student.
So, okay, and then like as far as the I know that there's been paid work experiences, internships, and where does the job coaches? I know families have heard that their kid had a job coach. Which umbrella does that fall under?
That would fall under the paid work experience and sometimes the SEAL, and is considered one of the pre-employment training services if a student needs it for a job coach to come out. They are not an extra worker on the work site. Sometimes people get confused with that. They are there specifically to help that student learn their role within that business and to perform it successfully.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions, and one is Like how does workforce solutions, because it's not like you just call up workforce solutions or workforce commission and say, I heard you pay for college and I'd like to sign up for that. It's a little bit different of a process. And talk about those IPEs and how somebody gets that going, and if maybe higher education is in line with their work goals. Talk about that.
Sure. So if you've applied for and you've been approved for vocational rehabilitation services, your counselor will meet with you personally and they'll build what's called an IPE. That's an individual plan for employment. It's different from the IEP you're used to hearing about in schools, which is individual education plan. So the IPE, the individual plan for employment, will outline all of the services that you should receive to help you meet your work or your school goals, which will end up to be employment goals eventually, and who will provide those services.
Okay, gotcha. So someone says, so vocational rehab is separate entity from TWC or the same?
It is part of TWC.
Okay, and someone says VR sponsorship is based on policy and laws. Um, can you give the guidelines, please?
So if you'd like the guidelines and the actual chapters, if you will just Google TWC VR, it will bring you up to a page that will tell you about all of the policies, the procedures, and you can even get copies of the manuals there if you would like.
Okay, perfect. And does graduating high school without endorsements have any impact on VR eligibility? And what about if somebody's under full guardianship?
Okay, so as far as endorsements, that should not have an impact on your VR eligibility, to my knowledge. VR eligibility is based on a need from having a disability that's going to be a barrier to employment and a barrier to training for employment. Everything we do is employment based. So a student needs to be able to go to work in order to participate in the vocational rehabilitation programs. So with a guardianship, if it looks like they are not able to participate as an employee, then they may not qualify. That's always done on an individual basis. So you would need to meet with your local vocational rehabilitation counselor to really know whether or not you're going to apply and be approved. You probably have to go through the complete application process. So some counselors may be able to answer that question for you.
And sometimes, April, there's a push-pull of, our kids are getting SSI and they're worried about their kid going to work and if they're going to lose SSI and Medicaid. And so a couple of things that I just wanted to mention for anybody on here that's kid is getting SSI and that has been a concern for you. There are what they call subject matter experts with Workforce Commission on SSI and working and how working will affect your child's specific benefits. There is a student earned income exclusion that you can apply for through the Social Security Administration if they're between the ages of 18 and 22 and a full-time student. And then also you can Google, you can type in, if you go to the Social Security Administration's website and you type in free benefit counseling, they also have benefit counseling on if you want to go to work. And how things change as that happens. And I just want to mention that I'm a fan of, listen, $9.43 a month. Some people are getting $6.29. They don't have a rent agreement in place. And if your child can work and they can grow their skills, they're not ever gonna make it off of $9.43 a month. So, worrying about the $9.43 being reduced, for every $2, a dollar essentially, I think is the small on the scale. I mean, so I just wanted to mention that. And so, okay. One person says, I've not been able to get a hold of our TWC rep counselor. Who else can I contact? And we've heard this from time to time. So if we're having trouble, if we're not reaching our counselor, if we're already enrolled in the program, but we've got crickets, we've heard nothing, and we want to move that along, what do we do on that?
There's a couple of things you can do. There's a state assistance number, that number that was up there a little bit ago, the 512 number. They can go ahead and give that a call. They can also walk into their local VR office if they've actually been meeting someone there, and just make an appointment with that person, call that office, or you can meet with a counselor of the day. There's supposed to be a counselor of the day on duty each day at local vocational rehabilitation offices, and they're available to take walk-ins. So those are some of the ways that you can deal with that. And then as far as I saw that there was a question about internships, and I went ahead and put the link for internships, the internship challenge for the Texas Workforce Commission. And that is another way that you can look for internships as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. So as far as workforce centers, there were a ton of things that we have here. And I don't take much time to go into this slide. And your workforce center may differ a little bit. And so we'll go ahead and advance to the next slide. Every workforce area has what's called target occupation list, and you can look for this on your Workforce Solutions website. And so sometimes we have people who dual qualify. They'll pick a career on their target occupation list for their area, which is supported financially a lot of the time for the training. And then they'll also qualify for vocational rehabilitation at the same time. So I just always let people know, ask for your target occupation list at your local Workforce Solutions office. Ask them how that works and how that assistance works in your area to see if there's extra help and you dual qualify for more than one program. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. And if you don't know where your local Workforce Solutions Center is, you can scan this QR code and it will take you to the area and give you contact information for your center with your zip code. So hopefully that will help get you in contact with Workforce Solutions and with vocational rehabilitation. And if you still have questions, you can always reach out to me and I'll send you information about getting connected in your area.
Awesome, April. Thank you for sharing this. I think it's important that we go over this several times a year so people know about this, because sometimes unless you hear from somebody else that has a loved one with a disability, you may not even know that this kind of support is out there for our families. So it's awesome. And one thing that I will mention, I want you to talk about the Padlet too, is that we do have entire webinars on the Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel, taking a deeper dive, like the whole presentation is about the different programs and what's out there. So you can check that out on the Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel. One person says, what about low functioning kids who may not have the capacity to work a job, but still need social, emotional supports like a day hab program, etc.?
As far as day hab programs, I would reach out to your local ESC regional connections. So I know Region 10 is my area and part of Region 11, and they release a list with day hab programs and other programs with their openings as they're available. So that would be the first place that I would look to for that. And then there are several other places that you can reach out to as far as getting advocacy and connections throughout the state of Texas. So hopefully that helps. And then as far as my Padlet goes, I keep updated flyers on there for vocational rehabilitation. So if you need a flyer and you can't find it at the TWC website, I do keep them there. And then I also keep endorsements for students, little flyers there about picking different endorsements. And then I also keep all of the connection information. I talked about that slide about connecting with vocational rehabilitation is also available on this Padlet.
All right, thank you, April. So if you guys have additional questions, you can put those in the chat box, and April will be checking those out throughout the presentation. So I always just like to just take a very quick minute and just share a little bit more about Consolidated Planning Group. I know some people have been attending for years, some people are clients, but some people are here for the first time. So Consolidated Planning Group, we are a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We're nationally certified as Social Security advisors, members of the Special Needs Planning Academy. We help families just like yours plan for the future of a loved one with a disability. I myself am a parent to 4 and 2 adult kids with disabilities that have transitioned into adulthood. So quite honestly, these webinars were born several years ago out of my own frustration of how hard everything is when we're trying to transition, all the stuff that we're supposed to know, not mess up, don't say this, don't have money here. All of those things. I do this. This is what I do all day, every day. And I felt like it was ridiculously hard when I was transitioning with my kids. So these webinars were born out of my own frustration. We have over 400 webinars on our YouTube channel on planning for a loved one with a disability. If you can think of the top of it, is out there. SSI and Medicaid waivers, special needs trust, guardianship, all the things that you could possibly think about, it is definitely out there. And so we typically have webinars several times a week. They're always from 12 to 1, and they later live on our YouTube channel and also on our podcast channel as well. So we help people put protection plans in place, lifetime care plans. We do a lot of transition planning. We help set up ABLE accounts, and we do a lot of advocacy by way of these webinars. So when it comes to planning for a loved one with a disability, there are 263,000 financial planners in the United States. And less than 0.1% of those financial planners in the United States have any background or nuance when it comes to special needs or special needs planning. And we always like to mention that. And, April used that analogy of a doctor versus a specialist earlier. And I think of the same thing when it comes to planning for a loved one with a disability. Our situation is specialized. It is important that you work with a specialist when it comes to the financial side and the legal side. So there are many, many, many attorneys. I haven't looked up the number of how many attorneys there are in the US, but there are not that many that are specifically nuanced with special needs and matters like special needs trust and guardianship and things like that. So it's really, really important, whether you work with us or whoever you work with, that you really do work with a specialist when it comes to planning. So today, what we're talking about is transitions and tips for launching your teen into adulthood. And I know, for me, it's like the kids start high school and you think you have all this time. You have 4 years, and 4 years with teenagers seems like a lot longer than 4 years. But before you know it, you blink and they're either out of high school or they're about to be out of high school. And so thinking about what's next, I think is really, really important. So the first thing I want to say is don't be a Facebook or an Instagram parent, okay? All of our kids are unique. They have unique abilities, and there's so much comparison going on in their life at school and everything. And, we're looking at all of the achievements of our friends on Facebook and Instagram and things like that. And it's so critically important to put our blinders on when it comes to that. That's not our kid, and that is okay. There's nothing wrong, but we really, really, really need to meet our kids where they are. And it's okay if they're a little bit behind. I always say that we always get to the party, and when we come to the party, we come big, but we're always late. And that's okay. It's okay to be late, but if we're building confidence and self-esteem in your loved one with a disability, a lot of them are very aware of their shortcomings. Their peers tell them all about it all the time, or they hear about their shortcomings at home all the time, and other things like that. And so where we can build them up and build and encourage their growth and meeting them where they are, even if they are 3, 4, 5 years behind, it's totally okay. So really thinking about those diagnoses, what are the challenges, what are the strengths, and are we going to have a traditional path or a non-traditional path? There are so many options out there, and I love the segue with Workforce Solutions today and kind of the programs that are available for our kids to go to work. So that is, certainly one place that we can look at. Maybe they're not ready. Maybe academically they haven't been great as a student. Maybe your student really dislikes school and they have no future plans to go to higher education, or you don't want them to, whatever that might be. So let's keep in mind all of the options that might be out there. Some of our kids we know will absolutely never drive. Some of them we may delay the driver's license. So one thing I always like to mention about the driver's license is there are disability driving schools out there. So if we have kids with executive functioning issues, they're ADHD, they're on the autism spectrum, they have processing speed delays, and we want to make sure that they could react quickly in a situation which comes up every day when you're driving. There are disability driving programs out there. There are behind the wheel programs that will help them close the gaps on any deficits that they have behind the wheel. But most of these hospitals where they have rehab, think of a person that has a stroke and they go through a rehab, they go through an evaluation to see if they could be safe on the road again. There are a lot of programs through the hospitals and through the rehab programs that where you can do a computerized simulator. So if you're wondering if your child could drive, I suggest, putting them through those computer simulators. Your insurance will pay for it. Your health insurance typically pays for this. And this will tell you, do they have the faculties needed to be behind the wheel safely? And maybe they come up a little bit short, but maybe you try that again in 5 years. So just check that out. And that is something that we did with both of our kids, and it was definitely effective. So we can think about trade school or community college. There are many, many programs. So a lot of families think that, well, my kid has an intellectual disability, their IQ is below 70, there's no way that they're going to college or higher education. And I just want to say that there are so many programs all across the state, all across the United States for kids with intellectual disabilities. There are license programs, certificate programs, degree programs. There are a lot of programs out there, so you're going to want to research those. There are such things as registered apprenticeships. These are things that you can check out on the Department of Labor. We talked about VR at length. We can think of a reduced college course load. They're considered a full-time student if they're going to college or community college or university. If they have a disability, they're considered a full-time student at 8 credit hours, not 12. So sometimes parents are thinking there's no way we could do that. There's no way that we could handle 12 hours. We'll start with 8. And if we have families that have younger kids on here, there are dual credit programs. Most of the community colleges have like an introduction to university studies or an introduction to basically, I'm not calling it the right name, but it's basically a course on how to be a college student and how to thrive and succeed at higher education. So that might be a good place to start. And it's a 4-credit course. It's a three-credit course. So maybe we take one course at first and we have some success and we pass, and then we add a second course. But it's important not to overwhelm or overload. I think that is really, really important. So thinking about finding a good fit. So schools, universities, colleges, extracurricular activities, a work setting, a career path. A lot of our kids may stay in the public school post age 18. They might stay until 21 or almost 22. And there's nothing wrong with that. My theory on this is when you have a child who maybe has an intellectual disability or has a disability that has them from a maturity level 2 to 4 years behind their peers, that extra time that they're in school, maybe it's a Mosaic program, an 18+ program, they're growing and they're learning and they're getting where they're going. And as parents with kids with disabilities, we have a lifetime to pay for these kids. So if the public school or the private school has an add-on program, there's no reason for them not to be in there. If they're happy, they're thriving and they're growing and they're maturing, these are good places to think about. And some people, they're looking at it and they're thinking, no, not right now. College is not going to be a fit, but it doesn't mean 8 or 10 years from now, it might not be a fit. So just, think about some of those things. And quite honestly, there are so many licenses and certificate programs out there that our kids can get and make as much or more than some of their counterparts that went and got a 4-year degree. So really thinking about where your child fits in all of this. And, you may have heard the phrase, nothing about them without them. And so I think that this really, as parents, some of us are helicopters. I'm not naming names or anything, but really including our students in on this process and what really makes them tick, what lights up their frontal lobe in their brain, and what gets them excited is where they're going to have the most success. So really pulling them into this is going to be really, really important. So one of the things that I like to talk about is accommodations. I know that we talked about the IEP not being the same as the IPE a few minutes ago. So a lot of our students have accommodations through the schools, maybe through your ARD meeting, your IEP that's in place. They've got accommodations in place. Accommodations do not transfer to higher education. So it's a whole separate process of getting these accommodations. And what I found frustrating as a parent is these higher education institutions, all of their requirements are different. They can't just be uniform across the United States. They're all different. They're not even uniform across the state. So every school, every community college, university, as far as what you need to do, how you need to apply for accommodations, what you need to do, what proof do you need to provide that you need accommodations is a little bit different. Most schools, they got a little relaxed on this after COVID, but updated testing within the last 3 to 5 years. But listen, if your child is in VR and they've gone through the vocational evaluation, the neuropsych testing, that's updated testing. So that in itself may be a reason to get them going in VR, to have that updated testing, those IQ scores, if you do not already have that. So that updated testing 3 to 5 years is usually what they'll require. Some of our students have a disability that is pretty static. It never changed. It's been the same since the day one. It's never changed. It's the same. So what I have seen is some schools, and it's worth asking, because this testing, if it's not paid for by VR or somebody else, it's pretty expensive. It can be several $1,000s, right? So it's okay. You could get a letter from the primary care physician or whoever the specialist that sees your child the most, saying that, hey, although the testing is outdated, the accommodations remain the same. I have followed said student this many years. These are the deficits, and this is the kind of help that will be helpful. I have seen schools accept that kind of letter from a doctor and not require updated testing. So you want to determine what kind of accommodations are necessary. So these higher education institutions will take a copy of your IEP, but it doesn't mean that they have to implement anything on there. But think about what accommodations have helped your student be successful so far and what you might need at that institution. So when I was looking at institutions, I was first shopping degree programs that we were interested in, and then second, shopping the offices of disability. All of these schools have an office of disability. Some are big and very robust, and some are very small and maybe not robust. And then I've seen small ones that are awesome. So if you know that your child needs accommodations, you want to make sure that the school can definitively accommodate those needs, because otherwise we're setting our kids up for failure. The FERPA will be needed to release information. And I know parents have been mad about this for years. It's the federal law. And basically, when you have an adult student, once they're, in that higher education, that student is going to need to sign a FERPA to give you access to call on their behalf or to get any information. And yes, the schools know that you pay the tuition and they don't care. It's the law. So they're not trying to be difficult. So you can download those FERPA right online from the school's website and have your student sign that and send that in. I always also like to mention that you should consider a healthcare power of attorney and a power of attorney for your college students and any aging family members. So our kids with disabilities, our neurotypical kids that don't have disabilities, that healthcare power of attorney and power of attorney is an important document to have in place in the event that they become incapacitated, which it could be automatic on the power of attorney. The healthcare power of attorney does require their incapacitation, but the power of attorney can be effective once they become incapacitated or immediately. But these are really important documents to have for our kids, and again, aging family members. It's a really important thing. Don't wait for the crisis to happen. I think of a fire at Texas State. We had a client, this kid was involved in the fire. I think of kids that were hauled away because of a mental breakdown, and these documents not in place, and they won't even tell you where they took your kid, like seriously. So it is an important thing. And I'm a fan of professional advice. I'm a fan of using a lawyer. to get these healthcare power of attorney and power of attorneys, but even downloading one offline and getting it notarized would be better than not having anything at all. So reasonable accommodations are required if it does not pose undue hardship. As far as the workplace is concerned, you can check this out on the Department of Labor and also the Job Accommodation Network. April, before we move on, do we have a few questions?
We did have a few. I answered them in the chat. They had asked if there would be slides, and I did say that they would be sent with the recording. And then we have one about internships and whether that was just for high school graduating students only. And I said it depends on the employer's needs. So
Okay, well, just pop back in if we have any questions. That sounds great. Thank you.
sure.
Okay, so educational options post high school. This is just not an extensive list, but this is an example. These programs are on here. Most of them are in Texas. Lynn University is actually in Florida. They're on here because they either have a great Office of Disability or they have programs, specifically for individuals with disabilities or intellectual disabilities. So there are a lot of programs that are out there. And so you want to research these early and get your name on the list. I would say apply for multiple programs, put them in order in the ones that you're most interested in, but they don't have unlimited registration for these programs. They don't take an unlimited amount of students. So the sooner that you look at these programs, the better. It being October, the FAFSA opened up October 1st. If we've got a senior, it's time. It's time to be looking at this for where you want to be next year. So let's talk about campus connections. This is through Bloom Consulting. This is worth a trip to their website. Bloom Consulting is awesome. They have a wraparound program that is designed to support a neurodiverse college student and help them basically problem solve and basically help them grow into where they need to be successful. This goes alongside any accommodations that they have at the college level. There is $1,000 per month private pay, or you can also discuss this with your VR counselor. If it's in line with that IPE for them to get to work, this service may actually be covered through VR. And then I don't think I have a slide for this, but I also want to mention the TRIO programs. The TRIO programs at the university are very, very good and very, very helpful. So you'll want to apply for those early. They only have so many slots, but the TRIO programs, they'll offer tutoring, one-on-one tutoring for free. Sometimes they offer books. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can get through those TRIO programs. So check that out as well. So when it comes to getting started in special needs planning, a lot of things, change when our child turns 18. A lot of families, I know that there may be some here that the kids were getting SSI prior to turning age 18, but most families, many families, their kids haven't been getting SSI prior to turning age 18 because it's based off of the parent's income and assets. But once the child turns 18, it's based off of the child's income and assets. So we're going to talk about SSI and Medicaid and kind of how that works. And we have entire presentations for SSI and Medicaid. April, what's our question?
On the previous slide, I think with schools, they wanted to know if these programs accept financial aid.
That is a great question. And the answer is it depends. The answer is, and this was what I was saying in the beginning, how frustrated I was. I had a whole spreadsheet of the schools and when their application opened and when it closed and their Office of Disability, whether it was good or not, and what their rules were. Because some programs are certificate programs, some are licensed programs, some are degree programs. It's going to depend on the program. It's going to depend on the school. So unfortunately, there's no uniform, press the button, here it is, and it's the same for everything. I'm sorry about that. If I could change that, I would update that and make it universal. It would be a lot easier. Oh, you're on mute.
I think that's it for right now.
Okay, perfect. All right. So when we talk about getting started with, special needs planning, we already talked about, working with experts, building a team of specialists that, having the right people at the table when it comes to planning. You're going to want to gather your documents. What are these documents? What do you already have in place? The thing is when we have a kid with a disability, as a parent, we have a big goal and big future ahead of us anyway if we're going to retire and stay retired for 25 to 35 years. But when we have a child that has a disability that may have care needs for the rest of their life, it's like another bucket for retirement. So planning early, planning intentionally and deliberately for these things is going to be really important. So some of your planning documents, they're the legal documents that you already have in place. Is it guardianship, supported decision-making agreement, power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney? It may be the special needs trust and the wills. It's your statements. How do you plan to retire and stay retired for the rest of your life? With what is left over, is that what will you plan to fund the special needs trust? So these are statements: stocks, bonds, mutual funds, investments, 401ks, 403bs, pensions, retirement plans, those types of things. Anything that you have in place for yourself or for your family in the future, to also include insurance that you have through your employers. This might be group health insurance, long-term care, disability, and you may have those types of insurance outside of your employer, which we often recommend. Oftentimes, most families are going to need their assets that they gathered over a 20 or 30-year career. They're going to need their assets in retirement. So how do we fund the special needs trust? And oftentimes people will use life insurance with the special needs trust as a beneficiary, to fund the future care for your loved ones. So there's all kinds of creative ways to go about doing that. So a letter of intent, this will help someone who has to step into your shoes. We have an entire webinar on a letter of intent. I often refer to it as a family love letter. As a parent, you have forgot more than anybody will ever know about your child. And if you're, even in a marriage, like if you're the caregiver and one person's working outside of the home, one is the caregiver, sometimes that caregiver knows more than the other parent, who is also very involved. But this letter of intent talks about everything about your child. And if you became incapacitated today or you are no longer here, how do they keep on keeping on? What are the diagnoses? What are the medication? Who are the doctors? What schools have they gone to? Where are the records at? What are your religious preferences? What are the guardianship, details? If there is a guardianship, where are the legal documents and the things that, everything that you have put in place. So this is an important thing to have. So do check out that webinar if you haven't seen that before, the letter of intent, and that's going to be on the Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel. But consider your vision and how you hope things will look for your family and your loved one and yourself. It's really important. I don't have to tell parents to think about the vision for the future of their child, because that's all we ever think about. But you got to think about your life and what you hope for your vision of retirement. Because if we have a child that may not ever leave or may delay, being independent, maybe they will not be independent, your semblance of retirement is different than other families whose kids, go to college, graduate college, get married, sail off into the sunset, right? It's a little bit different. So your vision, you have to have some respite built in to that, and and some of the things that you wanted to do and hope to do in your retirement. It can't be all caregiving and no rest and nothing that you had hoped for. So that is really important, because what we know is that when we put everybody else's needs in front of our own, that our own health declines sooner versus later, and it hinders our caregiving ability as we move along. So it's really, really important. I just have to, I'm very intentional in talking about that to people, because this is the marathon, not the sprints, and it's a little bit different. Okay. So planning for the future, developing a future care plan now is going to answer some of these questions, like how much do you need to fund a special needs trust? That's why people seek us out. They want to know, how much money do I need to fund a special needs trust? Where am I? Am I on track to retire and be okay and be able to stay retired and still have enough money to fund a special needs trust? And if I'm not on track, what knobs do I need to turn between now and the next 10 or 15 years if I'm planning to continue to work to be where I need to be? So I always tell people it's not about looking back or beating yourself up about what you haven't done. It's about looking forward and looking clearly of, where are we right now? Where do we need to be? And what steps do we need to take to get there? And it'll be it's definitely achievable. So I just want to encourage you there that it is achievable. How do I maximize Social Security benefits for my whole family? Being nationally certified as Social Security advisors, we have the only software out there that takes into consideration a disabled adult child under a parent's record. When we have a child whose disability started prior to age 22, they have the ability to be covered under a parent's record for Social Security when that parent turns on their Social Security or their Social Security disability. But there are very, very specific strategic measures that you should take to turn on benefits at the right time to maximize benefits for yourself, if you're married, your spouse, and your disabled adult child. And quite honestly, some families have more than one disabled child. So it is really, really important to evaluate that. If you Google this, I think it's like some 80 or 85% of Americans have claimed their Social Security incorrectly, and which basically means that they're leaving money on the table, on the table, long term, short term. So I think it's really, really important when you have a disabled adult child that you know the strategy, because there are definitely programs. There are even programs out there for a child in care benefit for a non-working spouse. So there's a lot of different things that it's important that you know about. And then thinking about what happens to my child when I'm gone. Who's going to care for them? Am I going to have them on a waiting list for a residential living situation where they maybe have some autonomy, they have friends, they might have a job? What does this look like? Some of our kids may need this. Some families will say, hey, it's me. It's the end. I'm the end of the line. I don't know what's going to happen after that, or I don't have any other family members. But talking through this, even though it's scary, it is important to really look at this, because we're of sound mind and body today, and you are until you're not, right? And so we've actually even had calls from people saying, hey, I'm 80 plus years old and I realize I'm not getting any younger, and this child is full care, my granddaughter is full care, and I'm real concerned about what's going to happen when I'm gone. So these are all things that we need to be looking at, and I am a fan of not waiting until the crisis happens to where we're scrambling. So I'm a fan of planning early, getting ourselves on waiting lists for transition programs, for residential programs. If you're on a waiting list, some of these waiting lists are 3 to 5 years. And if you come up on the list, it doesn't mean you have to say yes, but it gives you the right to say yes. So I'm a fan of getting on some of these lists and kind of, exploring your options that way. So when we think about how your child's care will be funded, there's a lot of different ways. Number one, we want to preserve the eligibility for state and federally funded programs, and we're talking about SSI and Medicaid. In the state of Texas, there are 109 Medicaid programs. So while yes, SSI comes with Medicaid, there is many, many other Medicaid programs. Some of the other Medicaid programs are our Medicaid waivers. A lot of our families that have a loved one with a disability, we've well heard about the Medicaid waivers, and we've heard that there's a 17-year waiting list in Texas for these services. So if you are hearing this for the first time, it is critically important that you get your child on the waiver interest list. And we have entire webinars on this on our YouTube channel on how to get on the list, who to call, what to do. So that's going to be really important. These Medicaid waivers are designed to waive off some of the cost of care for caring for an individual with a disability to keep them in home and community-based services. It is, they may pay for attendance services, respite services. They may pay for various therapy. I've seen them pay for transition programs. So these are things that you need to know about. So SSI and Medicaid, SSI is $943 a month. If you're getting $629 or $628 a month and some change, that tells me you need to submit a rent agreement to get it up to the full $943 a month. If you don't have a rent agreement in place, there's going to be a 1/3 reduction to your SSI. So that's what takes it down to the $629. Okay. So another place that we will fund our kids' care is a special needs trust. A special needs trust is a place that we can have an unlimited amount of money for the future care of our loved one with a disability. So it might be called the special needs trust for the benefit of Johnny Smith, for instance. So you can have an unlimited amount of money. So Medicaid guidelines are $2,000. We can have more than $2,000 in a kid's name outside of an ABLE account or a special needs trust. Okay, so if they have more than $2,000 in their name outside of those two accounts, then they're going to disqualify for SSI and they're going to lose their Medicaid eligibility. So that is really an important factor to know. So an ABLE account is another place that we can have money in, but there is a limited amount of money. Basically, an ABLE account is under the tax code 529A for ABLE. If the individual's disability started prior to age 26, they can have an ABLE account. In 2026, if their disability started prior to age 46, they can have an ABLE account. And it kind of acts like a Roth, but it's not. But basically, after tax contributions, anybody can contribute to a Roth for the individual with a disability, including the individual with a disability. You can make contributions to the ABLE account from the money that comes from SSI or Social Security. Income earned in the account is not taxable. Contributions aren't deductible, but it does not jeopardize SSI and Medicaid. And for 2024, the contribution limits are $18,000 a year. This goes up every year, subject to the gift tax exclusion. And if the individual with the disability is working, they can put an additional $14,580 into the ABLE account up to their full earnings amount of that amount. So if they only earned $5,000, the additional amount over the $18,000 that they could put in would be the $5,000. Okay. So again, entire presentations on the ABLE account. So you'll want to check those out. We help people open ABLE accounts all the time. So when do I need a special needs trust and guardianship? We have lots and lots of webinars on special needs trust and guardianship. There's two types of special needs trust. There's a first party special needs trust, which is the kids' money. This could have been a lawsuit or a settlement or money that somebody accidentally left them to their name outright, as opposed to a third party special needs trust. A third party special needs trust is how we properly leave money to our loved one with a disability. There's no Medicaid payback on this special needs trust, and it won't be counted against them for SSI and Medicaid purposes. So guardianship, this is a delicate subject and one that a lot of people have a lot of questions on. The guardianship process can begin 6 months prior to the child turning 18. It cannot become effective until after they turn 18. In Texas, the law is the least restrictive, most appropriate for the ward. Okay, that's the word that they use. So we do have a supported decision-making agreement in the state of Texas, which usually goes alongside a healthcare power of attorney and a power of attorney. But those documents, if your child does not have the capacity to understand what they're signing in a power of attorney or a healthcare power of attorney or supported decision-making agreements, those documents may be rendered null and void. So you really do need to talk to an attorney. They're trained. You don't have to know what you need when you go to sit down with them. I know this is an emotional decision, but they're trained to talk to you about the functionality of your loved one, what they can do, what they can't do, and lead you in the right direction. Is it partial guardianship? Is it full guardianship? Or is it some lesser, option like the supported decision-making agreement, power of attorney, and healthcare power of attorney? So again, working with a qualified attorney to prepare all these documents is important. And so my advice here is your neighbor next door who's a real estate attorney that said that they'll do a special needs trust for you for discount or for free. Just say no. You really want to work with an estate planning attorney that is nuanced with special needs. It's really, really important. I see these these people downloading the DIY documents on the internet, and they're wrong. I see where they've, worked with an attorney that didn't have any background in special needs, and then they end up having to pay another attorney to do them correctly. And it is important to have your documents reviewed every 3 to 5 years. And I don't mean you have to change them every 3 to 5 years, but the laws change. So it is important to have these documents reviewed every 3 to 5 years and updated in case the laws have changed. And this is really true for all states if you're listening from out of state. And for guardianship in Texas is by county. So if you move from one county to the next county, you got to update all of that. So it's really important that you understand that as well. So let's see here. Next slide is this is some transition and residential programs. This is just a few of them. They're all over the state. Transition and residential programs are all over the state. We've got lots of lists on these things. But again, think about the transition program that's offered by your district. Is there an 18 plus program? Is there a Mosaic program? And there's these transition programs that are even after the 18 plus or Mosaic programs. So checking these out, getting on their list, seeing what might be a good fit for your loved one is going to be a really important factor. What we want to avoid when we're transitioning is that the kids leave the high school and they come home and they play video games, or they do nothing and they're not working, or they don't have, some friends or community. And we want to have friends and community and be building their skills and things. Okay, April, let's take a couple of questions.
We have some thank yous, but we don't have any more questions right now.
Okay, awesome. Well, so for here, what we have on the slide right now is our upcoming webinars. Again, we do webinars every single week. Sometimes I do them, sometimes Michelle does them. So you guys have seen Michelle in the past. Here, there she is. The upcoming webinars will have a link to where you can register for the webinars. We always provide a copy of our slides and a link to the recordings. So if you register for that and then you miss it, you will get a copy of those slides. And again, always they're going to live on our YouTube channel, so you can check those out and at a time that is convenient for you. So when it comes to the things that you should keep on your planning radar, how to develop a comprehensive special needs care plan, the future care cost estimates, this is how much money do we need to fund a special needs trust, making sure you know where your child is on the Medicaid waiver list, making sure that they are in fact on the list. Guys, know that there is a crisis diversion slot for HCS. If the situation warrants, if the kid is a threat to themselves or others, if they're at risk of being placed outside the home, if one parent has died, one caregiver has been diagnosed with something and now their caregiving ability is diminished as a result of that. Maybe as a caregiver, now you're taking care of your aging parents. All of these might be reasons that a crisis diversion slot might be available to you. Instead of a 17-year waiting list, you move to right now. Okay, so just know about that. SSI, SSDI, understanding the difference, knowing when and how to apply. Talked about our ABLE accounts, beneficiary designations. I didn't hit on this time. I always hit on. That is very, very important that we do not name our disabled child as a beneficiary on anything we have. We want to name the special needs trust for the benefit of said child. When we name them outright as a beneficiary, they're going to get more than $2,000 and they're going to disqualify for Medicaid and could lose their SSI. And that is why we want to do the special needs trust for that. So we want you to start touring residential and transition programs, getting your name on the list. A lot of them require a tour. Some of them will still do a virtual tour. I'm a fan of the in-person tours. I've done a lot of them and they're great. And you can really feel how the residents like it. And how the community works and how it's kind of a good experience. So I do recommend that. And then, of course, the guardianship, alternatives to guardianship. So what if your kid's 26 now and you never really thought about the guardianship or alternatives to guardianship, but your child has an intellectual disability, their IQ is well below 70, they don't have the capacity to understand what they would be signing in the power of attorney or healthcare power of attorney. And the deal is, no problem. You can still talk to an attorney. You're not too late. It's not too late. It's not about looking back. It's about looking forward. And when I think of guardianship or alternatives to guardianship, I think of, if something happened to me today, can this kid handle life? Can they handle bills? Can they get themselves to and from work? Can they work? What can they do? What can they not do? If your child cannot do activities of daily living, feeding oneself, getting in and out of bed, toileting, transferring, bathing, if they have an intellectual disability of 70 or below or well below, then that may be an indication that you need to look at something other than the supported decision-making agreement power of attorney and healthcare power of attorney.
We do
So,
have,
sure.
I'm so sorry, there's one quick question. Do you have an example of a letter of intent?
We do, and we will be happy to send that out. We have a letter of intent template. It's really long. It's 20 pages, which sounds crazy, but that's all the information that's stuck in your head, right? That other people don't know, that if something happened to you tomorrow, that they don't know these things. So I say give yourself some grace as you're completing this. You don't have to complete this in one setting. And sometimes it's emotional when you're putting this stuff down, or of the things that maybe we're falling short on or whatever. It might not feel great. But give yourself some time and do, and fill out that letter of intent. We will send out that template with today's slides and a link to the recording. So what we have on our screen here is our QR code. This will take you to our calendar, and should you want to schedule a free personalized consultation to talk a little bit more about your loved one, the planning that you've done so far, and what help that you need, we'll be happy to chat with you. So this QR code, you can hover your camera over it, it'll take you to our calendar. And again, this will be in the link in the email that you guys are going to get. Well, thank you everyone for being here with us today. Certainly my pleasure. And April, thank you for talking to us about the programs from Workforce Solutions and Workforce Commissions. And thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to chatting with all of you again soon.
Thanks, bye.
Bye now.